Very warm welcome to this session. So in this session, we are going to learn about what exactly is a subnet, what is a route table, and what is an internet gateway, and what is the importance of these components when it comes to the VPC. So in the last session, we had seen about the virtual private cloud, the VPC, and here we'll understand what is the importance of the subnet, route table, and internet gateway. So we saw that when you're creating a virtual private cloud, we create it using something called as a CIDR block, right? So we take a range of IP addresses, which is the supernet or the complete network, the large network on which we are working. And within that large network, within the VPC, we create multiple smaller networks called as subnetworks or subnets. So this process helps us to further decentralize different equipment or isolate them from each other so that we can design our network in such a way that even within the larger network we can separate a set of resources from each other. Okay, so that's why we need subnet, which is also called as subnetworks. So within the VPC, the entire IP range of the VPC, we define the IP range of the subnetwork also. So as we had seen in the last session, if I go to the specific region, let's say that I was working on the Mumbai region. So I go to Mumbai region and I select VPC, which is virtual private cloud. So I select this. You'll see that apart from the default VPC that we have created by AWS already, I have created another VPC called as Mumbai VPC. So this VPC is the one that I have created. And if you see here, it will say default VPC no. So the default VPC no means it's a VPC that we have created ourselves, right? So when I go into this VPC, I can now further create other sub networks, smaller networks within this VPC itself. So on the left hand side of the screen, if I see, I click on subnet, and if you see, I have created two different subnets. So I have one public subnet and one private subnet, and both these subnets are within the same VPC that we have created called as Mumbai VPC. Okay, so if I show it this way, you'll see that these three subnets are under the default VPC. That's why these three subnets are the default subnets. See here, default subnet, yes, yes, yes. So these are the subnets which were already created and provided to us by AWS. But these two subnets are the ones that we have created, and they are associated with the Mumbai VPC that we have created. This is the IP range that they have. And if I see here, it says default subnet, no, because it is created by us. Now, when you're creating a subnet, you assign it an IP range which is within the IP range of the VPC. So if you see here, I have assigned it a range called as 10.0.2.0 /24 and 10.0.1.0 /24. Whereas my VPC's range is, if you see, 10.0.0/16. Okay, so this we've seen in the VPC session. Now, once I'm within the subnet, there are a lot of things that we need to keep in mind about the subnet. So when you are creating a subnet, uh, there is no difference in terms of whether it is private or public. And what is the importance of a private and a public subnet, that we'll understand now. So what is the difference between a private subnet and a public subnet? So when we are creating the subnets, both the subnets are exactly the same. You create the subnet within the VPC and you define the IP range. So if I go ahead and create a new VPC here, if I click on this, if I create a new subnet here, if I click on this orange button here, it will tell me which VPC do I want to create the subnet under. So I just select this Mumbai VPC here. So this is the IP range. Now my range for the subnet has to be within this range. If I take anything other than that, it will not let me create that. So if it is, because it is /16, the first two octets belong to the VPC. I cannot use that for the subnet. So I have to define my subnet from the third octet onwards. Okay, so now I give my subnet a name. So I just give it a name called as demo VPC, let's say, and I have to select an availability zone. Okay, so let's say I select the first one. Now this is the VPC IP range, and if I select the IP range as 10.0. Third octet defines the subnet. So let's say something like, I say something like 3.0/24. Okay, so this is my subnet. Now if I take something like 10.1, this does not fall under the overall network range of the VPC, in that case it will give me an error. So if I click on create subnet, it will give me an error saying that it does not fall within the CIDR range of the VPC. So I have to make sure that because this is the VPC range is /16, I have to make sure that the first two octets remain the same for my subnet. So I have already created two subnets with 1 and 2. That's why I'm creating 2 here, 3 here. I'm taking 3 here. If I take 2 again, it will say that it is overlapping with an existing subnet. So I can take anything from 1 till because it has 256 options available for me. I can take anything from 1 to um, 254, okay, or 255 also. Okay, so it has now, I've created another demo. Sorry, this should be demo subnet. Okay, so I've created three subnets. One is a private. I've named one as private subnet, the other one as public subnet. This is the demo subnet. Now, if you notice, when I created the subnet, it only asked me for the IP range. It did not ask me for any information which actually makes it public or private, right? That's because there is something else we do to actually make it public. Okay, so before seeing that, we need to understand a few more things about the subnet. Okay, so a subnet is limited to a specific availability zone in a region. So if you notice, when I created this particular subnet, it asked me which availability zone do you want to create it in, right? So it cannot span across multiple availability zone. That means multiple data centers, whereas a VPC is more of a logical view of the entire virtual private cloud, right? So it can span across 3 different or 4 different availability zones as well, but a subnet is limited to one particular availability zone. So if I click on this subnet, you'll see that it will show that it is within this availability zone, AP South 1A. So it is limited to that particular availability zone. Now, another important thing about subnet is that a subnet by itself, once you have created and you have deployed resources within that subnet, they cannot really communicate with other networks unless you give them the actual route or the routes in which that they have to the traffic has to move. So for that we use something called as a route table. So we'll see that as well. Now, why do you need different subnets, right? So first of all, whenever you are deploying any application or website or whatever, web servers or something, you need to separate them in terms of web tier and app tier, etc., right? So whenever you're deploying an application, it will have a web facing environment where the general public is connecting to the web server and they're accessing details of the website or the application. And then there will be a database as well where it will have all the confidential information. Now you don't want to expose that kind of information to the general public, right? So that's why you need to keep all your data in terms of web facing applications and the private applications. You have to keep private data, you have to keep them separate. That's why you have different subnets, and you make sure that public facing applications or public facing part of the application is in the public subnet, and all the critical components, confidential information like the databases and the application logic, etc., we keep it in the private subnet. Okay, so that's why you need the differentiation. And even in terms of how do you deploy different applications, let's say you want to keep different applications separate in different networks so that you can apply different rules, right? So let's say that you want a particular database to be accessed by one particular subnet application server, but you do not want that to be accessed by another application server in another subnet. So you can set up different kind of rules and routing in terms of which one can access what, right? So in order to make sure that we have different routing rules in place, we have different security groups in place so that it will allow the traffic to come in and go out, we need different subnets. Okay, so it allows us to isolate the database as well so that it won't have any direct internet access. So like I told you, in the public subnet you will have direct internet access. In the private subnet you will not have direct internet access, and that's what separates them. That's what when we are creating a subnet, You create it exactly the same way, but what makes them public and private is whether they have internet access or not. And how would they have internet access? That's what we are going to see now. So the most important thing that we have understood here is you need subnets so that you can separate different types of resources in terms of what can be accessed from where, which can access the internet, which should not access the internet, which is confidential, which is public facing. So in order to make sure that you separate all these different types of devices and resources, you have different subnets. Also, one more important aspect of subnet is that it provides you multi availability zone wise high availability, right? So let's say that you want to create your resources in such a way that if you keep it in only one availability zone, that is only one data center, and if there is any issue with that data center, let's say that there is a natural calamity or some power issue, even the multiple power backups are failing, in those cases, if that entire data center becomes unavailable, your application will go down, your application will not be available. So in those kind of cases, you want to make sure that we have enough servers running in different availability zones or different data centers, so that, and you have different techniques called as load balancing and application scaling, etc., so that even in cases where one availability zone goes down, your applications will continue to run from the second or the third availability zones that you have focused. So in those kind of cases, you deploy your resources in different subnets in different availability zones also. So that is also one reason subnet is very important. Okay, so now how do you manage the traffic from the subnet to different places? For that, you use something called as a route table. So if I come here, you'll see that if I go to route table, I have created a route table called as public route table. RT means route table, and private route table. So if I go to this route table, I will have different routes. So let me show to you exactly what do we do. So let's say that now I have created two different subnets. Okay, so once I create two different subnets, how do we define whether it is a public subnet or a private subnet, right? So if you see, we have two different subnets in this place. So if I ignore the demo subnet, I have one private subnet and one public subnet. But if I go in and check the details in terms of configuration, they will be exactly the same. So what makes it public and private is whether they have access to the internet or not. Okay, so as soon as I create a subnet in a VPC, by default they will never have access to the internet. If I create a VPC also, that entire VPC, virtual private cloud, will never have access to the internet. So no matter how many subnets I create within that VPC, none of those subnets by default will have internet access. So by default, whenever I create a subnet, it will always be a private subnet. Even though I have named it as public subnet, it is only for my reference, but in terms of configuration, it is still a private subnet. Okay, now how do you make it public? You make it public by creating a resource called as an internet gateway. Okay, so what have we done so far? So first, we created a virtual private cloud. We created a virtual private cloud. So this is my AWS VPC. Within this VPC, we have created two different subnets. Okay, we have created two different subnets. So this is my subnet 1, this is my subnet 2. So my AWS VPC is my large network. Within this network, I have created two different smaller networks. So this network has the IP range as 10.0.0.0/16, whereas my subnet 1 has 10.0.1.0/24, and this one has 2.0. Okay, so this is my current setup. Now by default, both of them have been configured in the same way. Now what do? I create a resource called as an internet gateway. Okay, so by default, the entire virtual private cloud does not have access to the internet. If I create a server within any of these subnets, they will not be accessible through the internet at all. Even though I will be able to deploy that server, I will not be able to access it because there is no internet gateway. Okay, but when I have my internet gateway provisioned, then I will have a path to go into the virtual private cloud and access the server. Okay, so I have these two different subnets here. So by default, when we are creating the VPC and the subnets, they will not be able to communicate with the internet. But when I create this internet gateway, all right, when I create this internet gateway, I need to attach this internet gateway to the VPC. Okay, so we create an internet gateway and then we attach it to the VPC. Once this is done, because now I have a gateway to the internet, now we will be able to access the now through the internet gateway. Because we have connectivity to the internet, we will now be able to access the internet through the internet gateway. But there is one last step that we need to do. These subnets will not know how to connect to the internet. The subnets will not know how to reach the internet, although they have a path in the internet gateway, but they will not know how they should go through the internet gateway. That's why we use something called as a route table. Okay, we create something called as a route table, and in this route table we define, that means we educate the subnet. We tell the subnet, if it wants to go to the internet, how should we go to the internet. Now the path to the internet is always called as a default path, which is denoted by 0.0.0/0. Okay, so this is the path to the internet. So we create a rule in the route table associated with the subnet, which is the public subnet. Okay, so once I associate this particular route table with this subnet, it will become a public subnet. Why? Because I'm giving a path to the internet to that particular subnet. So I create a route table here. In the route table, I define, if you want to reach the internet, go through the internet gateway. Okay, so in the route table, I mentioned, if you want to go to the internet, that is 0.0.0.0. If you want to go to the internet, go through the internet gateway. And when I define this path, the resources in the public subnet will by default know that they need to go to the internet, and from there they need to reach the internet gateway, and then they need to reach the internet. So if you see, when we create the VPC, by default it cannot connect to the internet. We created the subnets, by default they cannot connect to the internet. So what did we do? We create the internet gateway, a resource called as an internet gateway, which is nothing but a router. Okay, then we attach that internet gateway to the VPC, and then we create a route table in which we mention that a particular subnet, if it wants to go to the internet, it needs to go through the internet gateway. And how do we define that? We associate this particular route table with the subnet. So this route table is only applicable for this subnet. If I want, I can associate it with the other subnet also, but we will not do that. We will associate it with only the subnet we want to be public. That means the one we want to connect to the internet. Now in this particular public subnet, I can keep my servers, web servers, etc. Whereas in the private subnet, I will keep my databases, etc. Okay, because it will not have access to the internet. So in the public subnet, we give access to the internet, and we keep all our web facing server, like our web applications, etc. In the private subnet, we never give access to the internet. There is a way in which we can, which we'll see later. But in the private subnet, we do not give access to the internet, and we keep all our confidential information in the databases. So this is the importance of an AWS VPC, subnets, route table, and internet gateway. So let's quickly see, how do you create an internet gateway and then connect it with the VPC. So if I just go to the VPC dashboard, so when I come to the VPC dashboard, this is my Mumbai VPC. So on the same dashboard, if you look at the left side, you have the subnets, you have the route table, you have the internet gateway. Now I go to the internet gateway. Okay, so I come to the internet gateway and it says here no internet gateways found in this region. Okay, so now we will create an internet gateway. So to create an internet gateway, you don't have to give any major details or anything. If you remember earlier when we used to configure routers and all, you had to define each and every port or interface and give a lot of details. But here, all you have to do is just give it a name. So you can give any name. Because I'm working on the Mumbai region right now, I'm naming it as Mumbai Internet Gateway, and I click on Create Internet Gateway. So once the internet gateway has been created, you see it says that the internet gateway is created, but without attaching it to the VPC, it will not be of any use, right? So if you see the internet gateway is showing as detached. So if you have multiple VPCs, you create one internet gateway and you can attach it to any particular VPC that you want to use it with. But right now we have one VPC. So I'm clicking here on attach to a VPC. Either you can click here or you can just close this and go to actions and click on attach to VPC. So once I select attach to VPC, I select the particular VPC that I want to attach it to. Okay, so this is the default VPC. I don't want to attach it there. I want to attach it to the VPC that I have created. So I select the VPC called Mumbai VPC, which I created. Then I click on attach internet gateway. So this is the first step of making sure that our VPC now has a pathway to the internet, right? So it's just like you build a home, and in your home you have a door so that you can go out of the house. But let's say you have a child and the child does not know how to go out. What would you do? You'll tell the child, if you want to go out of the house, go through this door, right? So exactly that's how we instruct the subnets within the VPC also. We tell the subnet, if you want to go out of the VPC into the internet side, you go through the internet gateway. So how do we do that? We create a route table. Okay, so on the left hand side, if you see, you have the route table section. So these are the default route tables. So I can now create a route table. So again, a very simple step, you just call it as a public RT route table. So I am going to create different route tables for the public subnet and private subnet, because we will have different types of routing rules for the subnets, right? So I cannot use an internet path rule in my private subnet because I don't want that to connect to the internet. So I'm creating a public route table. I say that I want to associate it with the Mumbai VPC. Now I just click on create route table. So once this route table has been created, now we create the routing rules. Okay, so I've created a routing table. Now we create the routing rule. But before creating the routing rule, if you refer to this diagram, we have to associate that route table with the subnet. Okay, so that whatever rules are within this route table will be applicable only to this subnet or whichever subnet it is associated with. Okay, so how do we do that? You come here to this subnet associations section. So I click on this, and right now if you see, there are no subnet associations. So I click on edit subnet association, and I have three subnets. So it is asking me which subnet do you want to associate it with. So I'm selecting this public subnet. Okay, so I select this public subnet, and now my route table is associated with my public subnet. So there are some important terms that we need to keep in mind. My internet gateway is attached to my VPC. Okay, it is attached to the VPC, whereas my route table is associated with the public subnet. Okay, so these terms are very important because when you're communicating on a day-to-day basis with different departments, with different teams, when you're planning all these kind of designs, so you need to make sure that you are using these terms, right? So attaching the internet gateway to the VPC, associating the route table with the subnet. Okay, so I have associated with the subnet. Now what do we need to do? So if you see, if I go to the route table, if I go to the public route table subnet association, it shows that it is associated with the subnet, public subnet. See here, right? So these routes that we are defining in this route table will be applicable only to the public subnet. Now I come to the routes. Okay, so here there is already a pre-existing route saying that this particular subnet can communicate with any other subnet within the VPC, right? That's why it mentions target is local. So within the VPC, it can communicate with any resource within the different subnets. But what do we have to do? We want to give this subnet a path to the internet. So we have to tell it, if you want to go to the internet, go through the internet gateway, like we had mentioned here. If you want to go to the internet, so 0000 is the internet. So we tell it, if you want to go to the internet, go through the internet gateway. Okay, so 000 is the path. So what do? I first click on this edit routes, and then I click on add route. And if I select here, you see there is a path already defined for it, 0000/0. And I say, if you want to go to the internet, go through the, if I click on target, there will be a lot of different types of resources through which we can use in AWS. Here we are going to select the internet gateway. So if you remember, we had created an internet gateway and attached it to the VPC, correct? So when I select this internet gateway, it will show me the internet gateway which is attached to the VPC currently. Then I can select that one. Okay, so I select internet gateway, and if you see here, it shows the internet gateway that we just created a few minutes ago. So I click on that, and now the subnet will know that if it needs to go to the internet, it has to go through this internet gateway. So I just click on save changes, and if you see, this route has been created. So this is the importance of VPC, subnet, route table, and internet gateway. What do? First, we create a VPC. So just to very quickly run through whatever we have done so far. First, you create a VPC, right? And then you create your subnets. And in the subnets, based on what kind of resource you want to host, you can make it either public, you can keep it private. Okay, based on what basis is it public or private, whether it has internet access or not, right? So based on that, it is public or private. And then you have internet gateway, right? So internet gateway is what allows you to connect your resources to the internet, right? So you have internet gateway, and then finally, what do? You have the route table. So you create the route table so that you can give a path to the subnet to go to the internet. So within the route table, there are two things that we need to do. First, you associate subnet with the route table, and then you define the route. Okay, so these are the things that we need to understand. How do you create a VPC? How do you create the different subnets? How do you create the internet gateway and the route table? And how do you define the path to the internet? So this is the important part, and in the upcoming sessions, we'll see how do you use the internet gateway to access the internet through the internet. How do you access the resources within the subnet, and in the private subnet, if there are certain resources like a database or something, if they need to access the internet for certain updates or something like that, in those cases, how would you allow them to connect to the internet? So all that we are going to see in the upcoming session. I hope this session was informative for you. Thank you very much for joining.